Hey, good morning, everyone. I can see that we have some participants coming in, so that's great. I'll just wait until we've connected up to our Facebook. Okay. Good morning, everybody. My name is Stacey Bobile, and welcome to the final Portal Presents panel discussion for Portal 3.0. Beyond Four Walls is the name of today's discussion. We'll be talking today about COVID and other influences that are releasing out from the gallery space. I'd like to start by acknowledging that today's session takes place on the unceded lands of the Wadawurrung people, and I wish to pay my respects to the Wadawurrung and all other First Nations people, their leaders past, present and emerging. As I mentioned, this is the final instalment of our portal discussions, and I'd like to acknowledge the hard work of my colleagues, starting with Harriet Gaffney, Arts Development Officer at the Surf Coast Shire, whose vision behind Portal has been an inspired contribution to the arts on the Surf Coast Shire over the past year. Portal would also not have been possible without the hard work of our local area coordinators over the past 12 months, Michelle Pond, Karen Steenbergen, Miranda Jarvis and Molly Vaughan. This morning we have such a wealth of knowledge in the Zoom room that it may be difficult to keep this discussion to 1 hour, but we will try. A quick introduction. Today we have Kate Garretson, an arts and culture consultant and public art curator. Kate's work facilitates ambitious projects that reflect community values, strengthen cultural identity and use art to engage people in the public space. She is a consultant curator with the Melbourne-based public art consulting company T Projects and public art coordinator of the City of Ballarat. So welcome, Kate.
Thank you.
Daniela Rodriguez is an artist and photographer whose work investigates community and belonging. Her public artworks explore themes of social and cultural identity, and she's currently working with the Surf Coast Shire in arts development. Gretchen Coombs is an early career researcher and arts writer whose work investigates forms and structures of care in socially engaged arts projects. She also considers how cultural institutions practice care through curation and public programming. Her preliminary report, Digital Engagement Strategies in the Cultural Sector During COVID-19, examined how digital strategies employed by different institutions helped communities cope with quarantine and physical distancing through connection with each other and through art. Ilana Russell is a curator, producer and researcher working across contemporary art practice. She's also executive director at Platform Arts Geelong and a research fellow with Deakin University's Public Art Commission. Her practice explores site specificity and response through the model of labs, residencies and cross-disciplinary collaboration. So welcome everyone. Now I'm just going to do a quick check because I have a horrible feeling that we are not going to our Facebook page. Not that I will be able to do anything about it right now. Okay, let's see how that goes. Okay. Now we'll be talking about technology and how great it is. And you know, in past panels, I've had an offsider who's been able to do a couple of things in the background for me, but this time not so much. So yeah, we're finally live on Facebook. And sorry, Facebook land, but you've just missed the introductions. But be assured that we have a wonderful panel this morning. So COVID was really a catalyst for many organisations to expand on existing explorations into the public sphere beyond the four walls of the gallery. But moving art into the public and digital space was the obvious choice for many artists and organisations, and for many the shift to these almost exclusive exhibition arenas was a challenge met with varying levels of success. Anecdotally though, shifting art to an external, arguably more accessible public realm has resulted in expanded audiences participating in and viewing art. This morning we're going to speak with 4 arts practitioners and producers who have worked in this space both before and during COVID. They'll share some of their work done prior to and during 2020, and we'll chat about how the public and digital space, how the experience of encountering a work of art outside the gallery space has a unique transformational quality, and its potential to provoke discussion and thought across a broader section of the community speaks to placemaking and a shared cultural identity. From the perspective of what's possible in this infinite space, what we presented as part of Portal was modest. However, our focus when we were developing the program was always on a high level of interaction rather than passivity. Our programming tried to focus on involvement, not just viewing, and creating a sense of togetherness where physical contact was limited. 2020 also gave us the opportunity to experiment with different exhibition models and platforms for performance, provide free workshops to our arts community, and even the space to talk about arts on the Surf Coast and where it sits. It provided an opportunity to shine a light on the fact that we live in a community of creatives, and this is a very important part of our identity as a community. Kate, I'll start with you. You're with Creative Ballarat, and their Open Studios event was scheduled to commence about 3 weeks after the very first statewide lockdown in early 2020. But Ballarat had I guess, a broader response in their Be Kind, Be Creative initiative, which was quite extraordinary. I spoke with some people up there in the early days of our programming for Portal, and I was blown away by the planning that was being put in place, and at such short notice. So can you give us a bit of a rundown of what that was?
Yeah, amazing how we had to sort of, I guess, pivot really quickly with these events that had so much investment put in by our local creatives and by my colleagues, and we had to really, work very quickly to try to engage people still from their home base. The intent really was about making people still feel like they're part of their city, part of their community, but being able to do that when we're all isolated and at home. So there were a number of initiatives, like you said, and we did end up doing a lot of things that I'm just having a little look there. Be Kind, Be Creative was the overarching theme for a lot of things that council did, that the City of Ballarat did. In terms of the arts, a lot of it was to do with commissioning artists to make new work while they were distant from the community. So we ended up with one show at the Art Gallery of Ballarat, which was fantastic, featuring 8 local artists who were asked to collaborate together during COVID. And we ended up with an amazing online festival called Be Here Now, which ran in November last year, and that featured over 24 acts across 3 weekends. Tara Poole and Kate Berry were responsible for programming that, and they did an amazing job to get it online and connect it to social media platforms where people could find it and view it. I think one of the things that was really exciting during that program was a work by Plug-in Human called I Miss Your Touch. And the idea was to bring 2 people together who were in different online spaces, and they would actually move together and dance together. So it was really about trying to create a artwork that had people creating things in real time together, and that was shown at the festival. I participated in it. I did a little dance with a friend online, and the experience was, when we had so little contact, the experience was really quite special. And then to have it presented as part of a festival, so that, we actually had a participatory artwork that meant people didn't need to have the physical touch together, but it was expressed through this artwork really well. So really, innovative uses of the online spaces became, it just came so quickly to people, I think. It became really essential. You could look anywhere in the world and start to see these really creative responses. So the cancellation of things like a really large open studio program that had been planned for, the 12 months before is so disappointing, but to have people kind of rise up in the local creative community and continue when they were faced with that challenge was really amazing to see.
Yeah, we'll talk about like the digital responses a little more later when we get to Gretchen. But like I think in those early days of COVID, like it was all digital because we were like actively being, you know, like we weren't able to actually leave our homes, you know. So even getting into public spaces, be them open public spaces, was severely restricted in the very early days. So we were very much limited to being in the digital space and developing, I guess, programming that actually involved an audience more so than just sitting back and looking at a screen actually took quite a bit of creativity and, you know, and I guess a different kind of creativity, which I think was done successfully and not so much in other areas. And I think a lot of the time that was due to, I guess, the speed with which like larger organisations and institutions like big galleries who don't have audiences anymore are sort of like, well, what are we going to do now? And so, you know, turned around like, you know, virtual exhibitions like virtually overnight. And I think everyone, like, while they really enjoyed that in the early days, everyone sort of got a bit sick of just sitting and looking. So I think the invitation to actually actively engage in something online was something that was really you know, necessary as part of your development of any online programs. But I've sort of done this, I guess I've done the order of things that we'll be talking about a bit asked about, because I wanted to talk about like art in open space first and like within the public realm, because I guess while the digital is a form of like public realm, it's still very private in that you can see it in your own home a lot of the time. But moving art into the public space, and I'd like to get your insights into this too, Kate, as the public art officer for Creative Ballarat. That public art program seems to fit firmly with an idea for placemaking for Ballarat, and I guess public spaces are the most obvious place to develop that. And you shared a couple of examples of public art with us in the early phases of developing this talk. And I guess both of them sort of speak a little differently to how public art can do different things.
So what we do with all of our work that we program through the city's public art program is think about the social context of the work, and we ask artists to respond for each commission opportunity to something that connects their practice to the social context of the space. So this work here is by Bryony Galligan, and it's called Open Every Door, and it's based in Alfred Deakin Place. And we describe Alfred Deakin Place as a space of protest. We have all of our, you know, in recent years, there's been the Black Lives Matter and the Right to the Night marches there. We've had, you know, when the March for Justice happened, it naturally happened in Alfred Deakin Place. It is that space in Ballarat. And Ballarat has that history of protest with the Eureka Stockade. That's a big part of the story of Ballarat. So we've asked with this commission, which is an annual commission, that the artists respond to that context. So Bryony looked at Alfred Deakin and the kind of history he had of connecting people who had spiritualist beliefs, and then connecting local queer protests and queer celebrations and contemporary queer histories in Ballarat to that site. And so for this work, that quote, "Not knowing when the dawn will come, I open every door," is a really beautiful quote, but it actually comes from the inside of a chocolate wrapper. And Bryony's quite inspired by an artist called Felix Gonzalez Torres, who makes piles of items, usually small items like little chocolates that you can take away from his exhibitions. So his practice is about that kind of temporal interaction with his work. And this was one of the quotes that she had from his chocolate works that she had kept, and it's a quote by Emily Dickinson. So the work kind of, for me, it really, conceptually, it sort of expands our understanding of that concept of protest, and of the history of Alfred Deakin, who the space is named after. And I was just saying before that it was interesting with this commission that was planned pre-COVID, that during COVID, the context of the space changed, because this wall is located at the back of the Art Gallery of Ballarat, near the area we call the Annex. And when the Art Gallery was trying to work out their COVID-safe plan for reopening, the Annex had to become the entrance of the gallery, because the gallery entrance is in the historic building is quite small, and the Annex is a very large open space. So they were able to reopen with people entering through the Annex. So this artwork became like the entrance feature for the gallery, when originally it was going to be at the back. So yeah, it's just something, I guess, that's important to note with public spaces, is that the context, the use of the space can change even in the time that you have a work there.
And even, I guess, the sentiment behind that quote probably changed a little bit during COVID as well, like gave it another a bit more gravitas.
That's right. Yeah, and it's about kind of opening up our possibilities, which we all had to do so quickly. And what was interesting, and I was thinking about before when you were talking too, Stacey, was that we had this really dramatic change that affected people's lives and their mental health and their well-being in such a profound way. But we were sort of asking artists to suddenly do a lot of work, and as arts workers, we suddenly had a lot of work on as well, where other people were sort of saying, oh, I've lost my job, or I'm at home, and we were suddenly in this space of having to create so many things as producers or makers of art through that time. So it was a very interesting time, I think, and it still is really, for artists and arts workers.
Yeah. And I think, well, part of the reason why I wanted to have this chat was that I think through all the challenges that happened through last year, it's also opened up a lot of new opportunities within the arts, and, for organisations and for artists as well, and how they practice. But and talking about how public art might be able to, like, I guess, activate different spaces, and this is another work you shared with us, which is beautiful, bright, and I really like this, how it contrasted with the old Federation style building in the background. It looks old and staid even more so.
That's our town hall in Ballarat, and this work was procured through Council's events team working with a local artist, and our really super creative events team in Ballarat have had to completely change around really big festivals that they run, like the Begonia Festival, which has tens of thousands of people generally visiting one really small site within a weekend. So that usually is housed in the Botanic Gardens, that event. But because it's trying to, it's now having a COVID-safe overlay, it's had to extend out across the city. So the way they've thought about presenting the Begonia Festival has been really different, and it went across a month instead of a weekend, and art interactions like this that we're sort of able to pop up and have a creative artist like Emily van der Molen work on it in a sort of quick turnaround way, is one way that they've done that. They've tried to engage their event audience across a longer period of time and using the city streets rather than using one small event space.
Right, so it was used to attract people out of the main event area. That's nice.
Yes, yeah, and just to sort of lead people through, I guess, from different interactions that were happening during the festival to the next. But it's been just apart from the event, just for our local community on regular days, business days, walking down the street, seeing something so bright and colourful, and having children be able to play. Emily said people have made games up around that work, and children playing different skipping games through it and things. So it's been sort of delightful, really.
Yeah. And that's, yeah, it's kind of, we're kind of jumping around a little bit, but like, I guess, not just in terms of activating spaces, but I guess engaging different audiences and engaging audiences without them even knowing that they're engaging with art, you know, which is really great. But another aspect of public art and art in the public sphere is that whole placemaking and identity building. And Danny, I'll bring you in now because you've done a lot of a couple of different projects in this space, and this was with the City of Maribyrnong, am I right?
Yes.
Can you talk about like your work, because you've done a lot of work in art that reflects cultural and community identity. But this project in particular was very well received. I've seen this in a number of different places, and I only just learnt this morning that the painting on the wall to the side is Brooke Andrew, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's and who is this photo of?
Well, it's of Aboriginal elder Uncle Larry Walsh, and he's the elder in residence at the Footscray Community Arts Centre. And so I did the Emerging Cultural Leaders program at Footscray Community Arts Centre, and met Uncle Larry, and he, you know, he's just a great personality in the area, and great storyteller, and loves young people, and so I thought it was like a great way to make you know, Aboriginal elders visible in the community, and you know, sort of recognition, and it started off with a paste up mural on the bridge. So down below near the river there's a bridge that the train goes over, and me and two other artists, Tanya Kraus and Ronch Vilna, collaborated on two huge paste up murals of these same two images, and for the City of Maribyrnong, which later, once they deteriorated, the City of Maribyrnong asked if they could make it more permanent because it was so well loved in the community, and we did it on the side of the Footscray Community Arts Centre.
And that's where this image is from, is that right?
Yes. Yeah, and it looks out onto the river. So it's actually,
right.
Yeah,
so it was made more permanent as a result of feedback.
Yeah, so the original one was paste up, so paper paste up, and this one is vinyl. So it's
right. And still there.
Yeah.
And
but my influences are obviously with this sort of public art, you know, from artists like JR and you know, the Mexican muralists who, you know, it was all about expressing culture and politics and, you know, what was happening around the community at the time. Yeah, and I think it gives the community more of an identity and something that they can relate to. And so that's what I try and bring to my public artworks, trying to engage the community through works that they can identify with or have some sort of relationship with.
Yeah, and those shared stories.
Yes.
And do you do that mostly through like using images of people, or?
Well, no. Well, I did another residency with West Projections Festival, and I sort of engaged with a community that lived on one of the streets that they had contacted, and it was a very close-knit community who had been fighting to save their street because it was going to be developed.
Is that this one?
Yes, it was going to be developed, and all the houses were going to be removed to make an underground tunnel for a new train line. And so they got together and saved it, and they were a really wonderful community. And so through the West Projections Festival, I contacted some of the members that lived on the street, and they invited me into their homes, talked about their stories, why they loved living on the street, and why they, why they wanted to protect their homes, and it was just this fantastic experience where I got to photograph and video inside their homes, what their backyards look like, which their backyards looked out right onto the railway and onto these big developments that are going on in Footscray at the moment with 20-story high-rise apartments, and then I made a video of all these different families, and then they were projected around the streets of their homes, and so then you went on a tour to see these projections by bookings only, because I didn't want to sort of let everyone know where they lived. They still wanted to protect their privacy and their way of life. So yeah, but it was a really great project.
Yeah, and I think the video that you did along with that was really great as well. Like, I think that, and I'll provide the links to, I guess, all of our guests, everything that we refer to today. I'll provide links through our Facebook page later on, because there's some really great resources there that, and Danny's video is one of them. And I guess too, Danny, these are really good ways of, you're having a bit of a God moment there too, by the way. There's a lot of light coming down. There we go. So I guess it's a new way of looking at a very familiar site. Like these, like you've transformed them through, these projections, which is a great segue to talk to Ilana about her work. Ilana, you're off my screen. I don't know why. I think it's just because I can only see four people at once, and my head's one of them. But Ilana, your work deals specifically with sight, and through your lab model, it does represent sight in otherwise considered very familiar in different ways by bringing in lots of different people, like I guess a multidisciplinary approach to looking at sight, and then having artists reinterpret that through this, I guess, multidisciplinary consultation. Can you give a bit more, elaborate a bit more on that for us?
Yeah, sure. I guess kind of my work is kind of what happens before, I guess, the artwork, or before the public intervention. But yeah, I'm really interested in this sort of notion of an artist's laboratory, and using that as a framework for bringing artists together to really think about a certain site, whether it's a city site or a very specific place, or more an idea or a notion of a collective, or what sort of a place or placemaking can be. And then through this framework of the laboratory, where I invite various speakers, facilitators into sort of lead sessions and lead conversations, artists really sort of interrogate, I guess, the site through these various methodologies and historical contexts, and then through, I guess, those conversations and that sort of intensive exploration of site, then the works kind of generate from that. So it all kind of comes before the work, I guess, but it really influences the way that artists are then going on to develop like really site responsive public interventions. So this is one. So a lot of my practice, like in documenting it, it's just people like walking around or having conversations or just sitting and looking. Like it's not, really high energy kind of works. But this is a really recent project, actually. This was just last week. I received funding through the City of Greater Geelong's Arts Industry Commissions to develop this work called Expanded Field, working with two amazing local artists, Sarah Walker and Sarah Jones. So Expanded Field was this intensive sort of urban laboratory where I invited architects, acoustic ecologists, artists, art historians, a whole range of practitioners who in some way kind of engage with the city or engage with the site or are part of the, you know, construction of, you know, that kind of urban architecture and framework of a city. So they all led a walk, and as part of that walk they kind of had a discussion or talk to a specific theme or talk to their practice or a historical narrative of the city. But it was all I guess really uncovering all of these threads and narratives of the city. And then over the next 3 months I'll be working with those two artists to then develop and curate interventions that they're yet to be, I guess, determined. So it was quite amazing, I guess, to have the support through council to support, a work that doesn't really exist yet. It's more of a, mode of inquiry into a site that will lead to something, yet to be determined.
And does this must fit in really well with, I guess, Geelong's regeneration as a site for, I guess, cultural production. Like, Geelong's really going through a regeneration of sorts now, coming from an industrial history, and now that those industries have died, I think Geelong is really going through a re-innovation. So did they, is that, do you think that's one of the reasons why they chose these projects as being really important?
Yeah, and I put that in, my initial proposal, because I'm really interested in inserting this framework, not just as an arts practice, but making this, kind of embedded in those initial design planning conversations and consultations that councils or developers, that they undertake when they're starting to do, these massive permanent infrastructure builds. So at the moment, City of Greater Geelong, they're currently building their new civic precinct, which is a huge, multi-million-dollar, multi-year project that will house, all of their sort of council buildings and infrastructure. So it's really, I think it's really important that these sorts of, I guess, these programs or these ways of thinking and considering the city can run parallel with consultation, just, this sort of public consultation that council does. And I also find that, it'd be really interesting to hear what everyone else on the panel thinks of, this idea that artists are usually brought in to kind of solve problems or respond to problem sites in a city, particularly in a public art context. I feel that, this is a difficult area, let's get artists in to fix it or to beautify it or to do something to activate it in a way. But I think that, artists should be posing questions back to the city, and, they should be opening up room for new, they should not necessarily responding or solving problems, but just asking and generating more questions. And so, this is sort of a model to open up and generate questions, I guess, or bring a different lens to those very, sort of more, I guess, more of those sort of rigid, sort of more bureaucratic kind of builds or plans. It's really lovely to bring in different opinions and different thoughts and methodologies, as part of that.
To be involved at the start of a process as opposed to being brought in at the end. And so kudos to the City of Greater Geelong for, involving creative thought at the beginning of things, when you're looking at regenerating something and doing a big, I guess, reconsideration of what Geelong looks like, to actually bring artists in at the start is fantastic. And so this is who's in this picture here, Ilana?
So on the left is Sarah Jones, and on the right is Sarah Walker. So I'm working with two Sarahs, and then that's me, who's sort of lying down looking up. But we were on a sound walk that was led by Vicky Hallett, who is an amazing sort of musician, acoustic ecologist, who works in Geelong, but is also part of an international forum of acoustic ecologists doing really great work. So that was, really wonderful, just sort of being guided through the city, listening to the sound of a lot of, the sound of progress, which is the sound of a lot of construction. And then, with the waterfront and going, it was really great. Just to kind of have that other layer, I guess, of experiencing the city.
Yeah. We'll take a bit of a divergence now and we'll go back to the digital. As I said, I've probably done this the wrong way around, but we'll go back to the digital now. Because I guess when we were talking about technology before, we were talking about how it opens up options within your own home, and I guess that was why it was so handy in the initial phases of lockdown, and that we could still engage with each other and with the things that we loved. Like I know a lot of musicians did a lot of concerts. You could see people like other musicians that you've followed, I guess, probably in a more, removed sense prior to COVID. You are now seeing them perform in their own lounge rooms. So I guess the engagement was at the same, in one moment it was you were very much removed from everyone, but at the same time you're having these more intimate experiences with people because you're all projecting from your home. Be that from the Zoom meetings to actually watching these performers in their lounge rooms. But I guess another thing that technology brought was the ability for larger organisations and larger exhibiting organisations to present their work in a different way. And Gretchen, you've done a really, I found your report in the early days of researching for this panel, and a lot of what you found in that I found really interesting. And it's a preliminary report, I understand, Gretchen, and it was called Digital Engagement Strategies in the Cultural Sector During COVID-19. Can you talk about how we might be able to reflect on the learnings from I guess, lockdown, and how larger and smaller organisations use technology? And I think you went into other areas as well, like not just looking at how arts organisations have presented, but other cultural institutions.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the report that was written probably mostly in early June. So I guess in the scheme of lockdown life, it was relatively early. And it based a lot of the statistics that I got were from a group called Pattern Makers, who had done the Audience Outlook Monitor, and a new approach, which is a different group, did a third insight. So this isn't my research that I didn't gather data myself. I just collated what they had found. And it was really interesting, and you can find it online, and they have regional areas where you can go specifically to your city to see how, who's engaging, for how long, how much money was spent, or what do they want to watch, or what aren't they watching. But it's sort of what you were saying, Stacey, in the early days, it was all about a sense of community, of belonging, and am I still on? Because it just,
yes, you are. Sorry, stop sharing the screen.
So it was that sort of interactive, the ability to interact with an organization that created that sense of social cohesion and community. And a lot of that was done through things like the National Portrait Gallery do your own portrait, and you send it in, or you put it on Instagram. And I mean, that's one example, but there were so many from all over the world, and certainly within Australia. So over time, in the last report that the Pattern Makers did was in September, and they found that due to obvious Zoom fatigue, the online participation had dropped off an incredible amount. I mean, way, way down, like probably what people hadn't really anticipated, because I think what it was a promise that it was going to get new audiences and new forms of engagement. And I still think that while that may be true, it wasn't to the extent that a lot of these larger organizations had hoped for. But what did remain was the audiences for seniors and disabled audiences, who really found the lockdown and the ability to access digital content and programming, education, whatever it was, to be great. I mean, that was really what was needed. But of course, at the same time that it exposed a lot of digital literacy issues, especially with seniors, and ways in which that seniors who were reluctant to, even as the restrictions eased, to attend things in person. So there's a lot of, like, the city of Melbourne has a really interesting program happening now where there's these intergenerational programs for seniors to learn how to mitigate some of the risks that they feel through any kind of digital engagement, whether it's a cultural institution or anything, having to do with psychological, physical, economic risks that they perceive. So these intergenerational programs are supposed to sort of encourage them to feel more confident and be able to continue to engage in ways that they would like to engage without those fears so much. But with that September report, it did acknowledge that the disabled audiences were still very keen on having a lot of digital availability, and it was primarily focused around interactivity. So performances, ways in which they can interact, not just passive. It was all about the active engagement, not passive, necessarily seeing things, online exhibits, but somehow being able to engage with what they see. Another thing that they found was that I think, well, this is a little bit different research, but I like just touching on Danny's point about what the role of public art was or is in terms of reflecting community concern and community cultural identity, was the social role of the museum really, the possibilities for that are really increased now that there's a different level of accessibility and different audiences coming in, where the museums can play a stronger role in communicating, reflecting issues of social justice. They found that in the Smithsonian and the Black Lives Matter campaigns. And so they can communicate those, they can play a stronger role in community about and deal with social issues where they're not being taken up by other groups at all. So that would be a really great thing to continue to really push, is that the museum can have a really important social role that can be political, that can be culture, reflect a culture. There's a lot of different ways it can work. There's a really great example that this museum in Washington State, it's now called Five Oaks, but it was called something before, I can't remember, but they did their only online exhibits now, and they're doing a lot of really interesting work with curators from different parts of the country and putting things together that do reflect gender inclusivity, First Nations issues. One of their online exhibits right now is having to do with the relationship between the Native Hawaiian population and the Pacific Northwest, and how they're managing to curate that all digitally is really interesting. So that's a really great example. But yeah, I probably rattled on a little bit.
So is it the ability to bring lots of different resources together in the digital space? Is that what's motivating, I guess, the topics of these newer exhibitions? Like,
I think so.
Is it that, or is it just the general zeitgeist? Like, we've got a lot going on socially.
I think it's taking advantage of the zeitgeist and really harnessing what's happening with cultural and social justice movements to really use, take advantage of. Now we have an opportunity that museums have sort of, in many respects, kind of, I mean, when you think about the really large, huge museums who are just showing us our history or showing us, reflecting back without really playing a really strong social role that has a political edge to it, or a more social justice edge. I think that smaller museums are able to harness that probably a lot more so than the larger institutions. UNESCO just put out a report about the role of museums, and they did this massive global survey with museum members from UNESCO, and really trying to align museums and sustainable development goals. So it's not just, it's about educating and help, people, cultural heritage, but also being formative in the community, and not just sort of knowledge repository or cultural repositories. So I think it's both. And I from my research with ACME, I know that there's certainly seniors who go to ACME really want to be a bit more active in, not just going in to see a film or to see something else, but actually have their role in there play a bigger role. And whether that's through digital engagement or just being there is, I don't know for sure, but I know that the digital really can play that role, as long as there's more programming, whether it's, through a City of Melbourne type of model or through a museum, a cultural institution, to provide some sort of digital literacy support. And a lot of times that's best done with intergenerational programming.
Yeah. So I guess like the digital space allows these institutions to tell stories in a lot more detail and to a level they've never been able to do before. And from an economic perspective, in a much cheaper way too, rather than putting together a large exhibition that takes place in-house, they can now put together these really carefully crafted stories digitally. But yes, exactly what you're saying about accessibility in terms of digital literacy is really important as well. And I think in the early days of COVID, with like I mentioned before, with the rapidity that we had to get a lot of these programs up and running, like a lot of accessibility issues probably weren't considered, I guess, as well as they could have been because of the speed with which things were turned around. But at the same time, probably highlighted what we need to do more of in that space.
Well, I think what you're saying is key, because one of the things that whether it was from, I don't think it was from pattern makers, but it may have just been from the UNESCO report or something, they're all beginning to come together. But this idea that you can't bend existing content to something digital or virtual, that you need to create from the ground up in terms of how you're going to present anything in a digital, whether it's, AV or augmented reality or virtual reality, or just having online exhibitions. And I think that's why I mentioned that Five Oaks example, because they're doing this all from the ground up. They're starting everything from the ground up. They're not taking the existing. So it really does open up a lot of opportunity to think how we're presenting things a lot differently, whether that's reflecting, the culture, the cultural identity a little bit more in line with who's actually there or who's visiting, or what should be represented. I think that those are all really great things to learn from what this pandemic in that way.
Yeah.
Now I'm in the sunlight. So like it's
going to be quite a nice sunny day, and that wasn't what was on the cards weather forecast wise. But and thanks, Gretchen. Like it's a great it was a great report, and I guess collation of all those different bits of research that were done. So yeah, please keep us informed of.
I will. Have a look at that. The UNESCO report that they just put out this month is pretty interesting as well, and what it sort of outlines for the future of museums. Yeah. And there are digital strategies in there, and it addresses digital literacy and digital divide, and also I think seniors and different types of audiences, because I think oftentimes audiences are considered as one, maybe the demographics, but yeah, so it really does try to nut out those nuances a bit.
Yeah. And I guess these new ways of showing too, Danny, you were talking earlier about an online exhibition that you put together for the local Safe Coast art space. But there was a perception, I think, early on that when I said when I was saying to you, Gretchen, about cultural institutions being able to put together exhibitions in a cheaper and easier way to present these stories, at the same time, I think there was a perception that like that ease, and I guess you don't have to put physical things together. There's a perception that putting something together digitally will actually be easier. But Danny, you were saying it's not always the case, because when you're working within a gallery environment, you've got a team of people working together to put an exhibition together. But Danny, you put one together that was online and found the experience was quite different.
Yeah, and so the Surf Coast Art Space is an artist-led facility and funded by the Shire, but we don't really have any funding to manage the space. And when we had to close the gallery, we got some funding to have a website, but there was no funding to manage the website. So okay, we had lots of ideas. Let's do this fantastic online exhibition, and asked members of the Surf Coast community to hashtag images of what they were creating during lockdown. So me and Elise Roberts, who was the coordinator of the art space, had this great idea, and we had lots of engagement. We had over 90 images, and but then we had to put them online on an online exhibition with no funding. And so that's hours and hours of work that you have to do to make these images look good on a website.
That's the thing, you can't just plug them up there. Because we all work in a visual medium, you have to make sure that they look good.
Yeah. And I mean, it was a great project, and it was we had a lot of good response and a lot of people engaging, but it was a lot of work that was done for free, just out of pure love. And yeah, so I think a lot of the grassroots sort of smaller organizations that don't have the funding to have a team of digital experts putting these things online, yeah, it can be fast and it can be great, but when you don't have the funding, it can be just a whole lot more work that you've put onto arts workers.
And in skill sets that may not necessarily exist or have existed before within that organisation. So Kate, did you find that was one of the challenges for Ballarat as well?
Yes, definitely. I think we're fortunate because the city had that that foresight to invest in the Be Kind, Be Creative program. So things like the Be Here Now you were mentioning before, Stacey, it had really high production values. And I think that was because we could say, oh, well, we're going to invest in the people who are performing at the event, but we're also going to invest in that that capture, have really highly skilled production people there. I don't know what they're called, but they had, cameras that were like TV production cameras at the event, because the sense that you need to present it online in a way that people are going to be receptive to, or is going to be valuable in that space, that was there. And Kate Berry and Tara Paul did a fantastic job of pulling that together, but it wasn't always without hiccups. It does take a lot, and everyone was just learning on the fly. I think when Gretchen was talking before about accessibility and how our audiences were able to access things, I think all the people producing these things were learning at the same time. So it was like, the production people are only one step ahead of the user of the technology. And when we just think about ourselves, we've all come so far in terms of being on Zoom or being on other platforms that we didn't have any knowledge of this time last year.
I too.
Yeah, we've all just sort of had to learn that, and I think we have to remember that our audiences are becoming much more savvy to the online space. I think the expectation about what's online has increased so much over the last year, and I'm not surprised to hear that people had fatigue and dropped off, because we kind of almost couldn't go any further without a bit of a drop off. We can't continue at that same rate.
Well, Be Here Now, when did that come on to, was that fairly late?
Yeah, that was in November. So that was really, there was actually a small live audience planned for each of those events. So part of the kind of deal for audiences was that if you participated in the plug-in human I Miss Your Touch activity, and you made a film of yourself dancing with another person that was going to be displayed, you would get a ticket to the event. But then the second wave came and that had to change. So there was only a really small number of people at each event, and most of the audience were online in the end. So, and it's just a constant, I think it's a constant with events and arts, all kinds of arts activities at the moment, is you just have to nothing's really set. You have to remain flexible.
Yes, flexibility is key. And, what I was going to say with that event, because the production values are incredible. When I was looking at it today, I'm like, wow, this is amazing. But I don't think audiences wouldn't have engaged that late in the piece. Like, I think early in COVID, everyone was sort of up for the homemade, not so great sound quality type stuff. But I think as it progressed, people were they got way more picky about what they would say.
That resource was kind of in place because it was funded through local government. It had that support and that backing. We were able to pay a lot of artists, and the intent of the program was to design things where a lot of artists and a lot of creative community were employed. So that was everyone from the sound techs to the people making the films to the performers themselves. And also Kate Berry did an amazing job of programming it into really interesting spaces. So I attended the one that was at the bowling alley here in Ballarat, and just having that interesting environment to present from as well was really incredible. She does a project called OK Motels, where she moves performers into really crappy looking motels around the state. It makes it an amazing night of performance. So it was that kind of model of using really interesting spaces that are not considered for art spaces usually, and having that music in the bowling alley was really cool. I loved it.
Oh, that's great. Well, we've come full circle. We've gone public spaces to digital and back to public spaces again. So it might be, and it's like bang on the hour. So I'm really pleased with how we've gone this morning. So thanks to each of you for your contributions today. I think this is a really, I think we're looking at a bright future. Lots of things to consider though, and keep working on. Fingers crossed that in the near future we'll be back to whatever we consider normal again. And but I think a lot of what's happened over the past year has contributed really positively to how we exhibit, how artists consider their own work, and it gives us a lot to think about and how we might expand the exhibition of art and expand our audiences too. So thanks everyone. I did want to, and I'm not sure if my digital tech savvy is going to work with this, but I wanted to share with our audience one of Creative Ballarat's, one of the outcomes from that was a wonderful poem and video that was put together based around our experiences during COVID, and it's on the Creative Ballarat website, but I will try to share it with you now. I will also try to share with everyone links about each of the topics we've talked about today. There's been a lot of great references here for people to look back on. So thank you to everyone, and I will try to show this as best I can, and hopefully my internet will hold up to showing a video as well. So thanks to each of you, Danny, Kate, Gretchen and Ilana, for sharing your experience this morning with us. And hopefully I'll be able to get this poem to work.
Thank you, Stacey.
Thank you.
Okay. Awkward pause. And of course I can't. I'm going to try again. Okay.
Limited.
And lest we forget as we speak the heartbreak of people returning their blood and their kin to the earth in scant ceremonies, in wind-blown and silent cemeteries, reminding us violently that this is no time for complacency, and in this elasticity of time, time is still ticking, and something is telling me something, and now I have the time to listen. The neighbour just said that they're baking their bread, and in the veggie garden bed they're growing their own, with the soil and the seeds, and they're sharing their latest how to do and how to be, calm and connected and safe and still free, to speak of their sorrows, their joys and their needs. And they're being all inspired and allowed to fall apart and feel heavy in their heart. And please tell your little girl that was so thoughtful and clever, that daisy chain around your neck while you sat in the sunshine and slowly pulled yourself together. You shared that post and it helped the most today, so thank you both. And thanks to the folks with their midnight dress-ups, to karaoke DJs and wishing strangers their happy birthdays. And in this time of front lines, thank you to the supermarket workers through heaven and hell with their packers of shelves and the drivers as well. And thanks to the patient and grateful and kind. And while that's on my mind, thank you teachers from the kids and the wife and me. And gratitude sincerely to our doctors and nurses and healthcare community. And the Victoria Police, as I write this piece, for in the service of protecting us all, are deceased. May you rest in peace. And last but still last, according to government policy, our artists, thanks for the songs, the films, the plays, the pictures, the dancing, the magic and the poetry. How lost and empty we would be without you now and always, but now like you wouldn't believe. We would be as empty as these streets. But there is the occasional dog on the lead and the cheeky bike ride for the family. But mainly it's home. It's home for now, for those lucky enough to be. And is everyone safe behind those doors? Can we please keep our ears out? Can we try to do more? Some birdsong continues somewhere in those trees, as the blue sky reminds me I'm not on my knees. And my parents are fine, so they keep telling me. And I'm lucky and blessed and sometimes distressed, but a friend called and yes, we've got this, I guess. Stay home and stay safe in this history we make. Stay home and stay safe in this history we make.
It was a wonderful little poem and beautifully encapsulates what we've all experienced in the last year. Thanks once again to everyone. So yeah, enjoy the rest of your Sunday and we'll see you later.
Thank you.
You.